We are recording.
All right.
This is it.
Are we?
Yeah, we are.
So far, I've interviewed 8 people. In this episode, you'll hear from 4.
I'm Carlton Mackey.
Gabriel Eisen.
So I'm Doug Shipman.
My name is Audrey Gomez.
I asked each of them mostly the same questions.
Can you tell a story about a time?
What small day-to-day action?
Okay, what 2 conflicting truths do you have?
This is what's popping in my head. And
In terms of question, I think we should stop asking.
So I would offer very humbly 2 questions.
One of which was, what do they want me to ask?
I feel like I would have wanted you to ask something about ego.
You should ask me if I consider myself an activist.
Do you consider yourself an activist?
No,
Yeah.
I don't.
And that's a good place to start, to try to get away from the labels a bit. And I specifically wanted to interview people who were doing the work but didn't always claim the title.
You know, this podcast is about social change, avoiding disillusionment, etc. And like any area, I think when people are able to claim a kind of expertise, it can be a kind of ego fest. Or it inherently asks this question when you ask someone to be on a podcast. Even if you're like, I'm partially interviewing you because I think you are humble. Yeah, it's interesting. And even if that expertise is like Adrienne Marie Brown talking about healing and radical community care and stuff like that. And again, I think it's a particularly strong phenomenon in U.S. leftist spaces because we can't help but import the culture of other places where individual personalities become so big and influential. And there's power surrounding them, even when you're talking about things that are about abolition and dismantling and social change and relinquishing power. Exactly.
So one of the things that I used to joke is that rule number 1, everybody's crazy. Rule number 2, you have to be convinced that the people who are around you are not crazy. Rule number 3 is see rule number 1. If you're going to be in a position of influence or power or anything that has high stakes, even if you're coming in it from the outside, you have to believe you have an answer that other people can't see.
Yeah.
You have to believe that, right?
Some form of ego.
Yeah. How do you offer what you have as a gift, but with humility? And yeah, what is the opposite of ego? Probably like listening. I think it's something that I've definitely am constantly struggling with, especially as a white man, but just as someone who's been around Atlanta and has respect being around so long and knowing so many people.
You have to remind yourself that you don't have exclusivity on the truth. That even though you may see a future and you may have to be completely convinced to the righteousness of that destination, you have to be humble enough to realize that it is not probably the right answer. In order to make change happen, you have to literally believe that you can see a future other people can't see yet. And that you're going to do it different than everybody else does, right? If you're really good at it, you're in the right zip code, and you're open to finding a more refined version of the future you can only see. But if you get so tied to the exclusivity and the righteousness and the purity of your vision, you'll miss. But you can't say, oh, I have no idea, and I don't know what's going on,
Exactly.
and my vision is just like anybody else's. It can't be. Real leadership, outside or inside, has always come from people who say, I can see a reality that's better than today, and a bunch of people can't see it yet. But you got to be humble enough to realize that you probably don't have it. And that's hard.
Yeah, that's so important.
The theme I settled on to unite these 4 interviews is abundance. And the first form of abundance is of approaches.
I hope that we create space for a lot of different on-ramps to the work. To a certain extent, I don't care which on-ramp you take. If you're driving down the same highway that we're all trying to drive down, going to the same destination, then come on, right? It doesn't mean you can't be in an activist community. It doesn't mean you can't be in an artistic community. But if we limit the on-ramps, we say you got to be this or that or the other to get on this movement, it's a lot smaller movement.
Beautifully said.
All 4 of these people happen to be from Atlanta.
I live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Edgewood neighborhood.
Lifelong Atlanta resident.
She's in Atlanta.
I am currently the Atlanta City Council president. have a long history in Atlanta.
Lived in different parts of the city, seen it change a lot, met a lot of people from different walks of life here, especially in the art world and radical political world.
So I have long been deeply interested in how does activism work? How do social movements work? How do they maintain a moral core to them? And how do they get things done?
And just a concerned citizen trying to make the world a better place.
But they've all chosen to approach the work in very different ways.
I've been involved in arts and culture for a really long time, and I'm kind of moving into the policy realm. I do some work in the cultural planning sphere and also in nonprofit consulting.
I am the Assistant Director of Education at the High Museum of Art, where I lead community engagement and community dialogue.
I was the founding CEO of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, which talks a lot about the history of civil rights in Atlanta and nationally, and also its connection to contemporary human rights issues. I was the CEO of the Woodruff Arts Center. I was in the private sector for a while, and I have degrees in public policy and theology with a special emphasis on religion and social movements.
I'm the creator and founder of Black Men Smile, which is an apparel company. It's a platform, it's a movement that celebrates Black men and celebrates the way that we see ourselves. And it invites us to center our joy over our trauma. Black Men Smile believes that Black joy is revolutionary, and I am a revolutionary.
I worked for a long time with artists on their business development and kind of thinking about how policies in our city and in our community helped or hindered people's ability to live and work here. And in Atlanta, we have a really strong creative community. It's a huge asset. Our city is a very entrepreneurial city, and I like to think creatives are a strong part of that. It certainly is what makes the city cool. We're known for our movies and our hip hop culture. One of the things that I did during that time was educate elected officials, various other folks in the public about the asset we have with our creative community and how that enhances life for everybody. Because a lot of times I think arts and culture is just really seen as this thing that's pretty fun, joyous. If we're choosing between that and health and human services, arts is the first thing to go. And I really see arts and culture as something that can make health services better, can make health outcomes better.
I'm the co-director of the Arts and Social Justice Fellowship Program at Emory University that I created after George Floyd's murder as a commitment to do more with my little portion of the university, to do more than write a statement. It is a program that brings artists into Emory University classrooms and offers transformative pedagogy and teaching that, regardless of the subject matter, challenges professors to teach through a justice framework and to incorporate art making so that the art that is created raises awareness or directly addresses a social justice issue.
In school for public policy and hoping to, think about those ways policy systems can be improved or be made more efficient through including artists and sources of arts and culture into ways of operationalizing policy. It's kind of a tip of the iceberg type thing, but some programs provide people with a prescription for healthy food. They might provide a prescription to go see a theater performance or a specific workshop, for instance, for people with Alzheimer's and dance. I'm not saying that we're going to replace your diabetes medication now with art, but certainly exploring those options as effective ways of non-medical intervention to improve people's lives.
In the beginning of the pandemic, I joined a friend's project called It Planta, which is a service that builds vegetable gardens for people who either haven't done it before or are intimidated by it. And importantly, it operates on a sliding scale because a lot of services like this are only accessible to people with really high incomes. Obviously, there's already a huge disconnection from people in urban settings to their food, but the pandemic made it super scary all of a sudden overnight because food supply chains were threatened, income was threatened, people's job security was threatened. So going through this interesting process of brainstorming with what limited infrastructure exists, how can people have some more food security in the city from the knowledge, because so many of us are disconnected from our agricultural history, which we all have, to the resources. Yeah, how do you tangibly address this problem? And it wasn't my idea, but Azhar Khan Mohammed, shout out. Obviously, we weren't the only one asking that question, because we had so many people reaching out, often citing worries about climate crisis, worries about job security, worries about food supply chains as their reason for being interested in gardening. We rely on so many of our calories, whether it's meat, grains. Food sovereignty is a whole other question. But we also, on the other end of it, have grown thousands of seedlings and built close to 100 different gardens for folks to learn how to grow food themselves.
I am a father. I try to model a broad spectrum of myself so that my son can see the many layers of who I am, so that he can have as wide of a understanding, as robust of an understanding of who he is, and so that he might dare to be open to all the parts of himself and to love them.
Of course, an abundance of approaches obviously means some that we won't agree with, whether that's politically, geographically, ideologically, strategically.
It's, it can be frustrating. It can be easy to be like, we can just be over here doing our own thing. We don't need those people. You and I were kind of talking about, I'm from Texas, and you mentioned you're from Louisiana, about how people can look down on the South. And I've even heard people from the North say, well, we don't need them. Or people from Texas be like, we should just secede from everybody else. We feel like we're better off without the things that all of these other people bring. And we look at it from such a scarcity mindset versus the abundance of having this great diversity of thought and experience. What's happening here in Georgia with people trying to enact laws that target trans kids or getting rid of women's reproductive rights. It's very hard to sit with those values of care, wanting to see people's humanity, for making those decisions when they affect me. And I'm very, very, very angry about that. It's something I want to challenge myself to do, and at least listen. It's hard to listen sometimes when people are saying things you don't agree with. It's very, very hard, and I really struggle with it. And my partner is the person who kind of keeps me honest about, like, you're getting to that point where you're not listening anymore. Because if we can't listen to other people, we start to think we don't need other people. And humans, we have to live in community with one another.
I visited Israel a few years ago, and an Israeli activist said, you guys in America don't quite get that you're one of the few places on earth where the nation and the state aren't the same thing. You're not a place of one people. You've got your issues and you've had your history and everything, but Germany historically has mostly been Germans, Japan's mostly been Japanese, and America has long been a mix, forced or not. And he said that's really unique. And we're undergoing a profound change around that, with the demographic shifts the way that they are.
On our own, we really can only get so far.
I think, another part of my life has been trying to figure out how to live communally, again, without the histories and knowledge, in the same way that we don't have the histories and knowledge of how to grow our own food. We also aren't in touch with histories and knowledge of, like, how to live village-style life, which would have been very common for most of human history, how to live with a lot of people really intimately, not just a nuclear family, which most of us, frankly, aren't even that good at living with a nuclear family anymore. So a group of 3 friends and I first set out to do this, again, at the beginning of the pandemic. We were so ambitious. We were like, we're going to live together, befriend all of our neighbors, and we're going to have a garden and have all of these conflict resolution meetings, dinner multiple times a week, so on and so forth. Probably pretty common for endeavoring on these kind of things. Pretty quickly, so much got in the way of all of our ambitions, like interpersonal conflict, constraints of having to work so much, kind of losing the initial ambition. What actually came out of that year was mostly like learning about what living together was like, rather than actually living together in a way that matched up with all those initial ambitions. We didn't have a whole farm taking over the backyards behind us. We didn't have deep relationships with all of our neighbors. We didn't have perfect relationships where we like moved as one fluid hive mind. In fact, all of those things went terribly awry. And now, 2 years later, I'm moving into a housing situation again, and I'm much more modest in my ambitions, but I'm also bringing, as well as the other people who have experience with this kind of living, so much. It feels so much more possible now. I'm so grateful for all of those hard learnings.
How can we do things in ways that care for people who don't think like us? And how can we talk about things without dehumanizing other people? Even when our intentions are good, I hear a lot of folks on both sides of, the political spectrum say things that are very dehumanizing about other people. And it's not my opinion. I'm not trying to be both sidesism here. I mean, this is like social science research that as people see other people as less human, they're less inclined to empathize with them, to care about them, and more inclined to be more violent towards them. If we really want to create a better world than what we have to think about how we can do that in ways that don't dehumanize others, even if we don't agree with them, even if they're dehumanizing us,
Right.
even if we think that everything coming out of their mouths is totally bonkers, like we still have to find the humanity in other people. Otherwise, we are doing the exact thing that we are hoping to kind of rid ourselves from.
I'm thinking about the limitations that we impose on ourselves. I now have a better sense of how much of a role fear has played in the decisions that I make. If I could ask myself, if I could ask you, if I could ask the person who hates me because of whatever aspect of my identity, if I could ask, what are you afraid of? What might be alternative solutions for addressing that fear other than trying to eliminate the source of that fear? Because I think what ultimately people do in the world that is most harmful is a reaction to fear, and that reaction is to stifle not just the fear, but the person, the thing that is causing it. Like, I don't like fill in the blanks because really I'm afraid of them. Like, I will shoot a dog because I'm scared. Eliminate the threat on this level and on this level is often an unconscious response, and it has caused so much destruction. And I am fully capable of being part of that cycle.
The thing about any type of work and community is like we have these wonderful values and wonderful visions, but we're all humans. We're all humans and we all fail sometimes, and we do want to like be true to the values that we hold, but we also have to give ourselves grace for the mistakes that we know we're going to make. I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about redemption and how do people come back into community when they're not right with community? How do we heal each other?
Thinking about interpersonal conflict and the way that is so exhausting. Tears things apart, takes over people's lives, and especially from like an abolitionist lens, how do we deal with conflict outside of punishment and cancellation and carceral thinking writ large? People are trying to like create one-for-one replacements. What do we do instead? How do we have accountability processes? How do we deal with our really hurt feelings without acting in similar ways to the government, to the police? And I think that's the wrong way of going about it, because you're not going to find a one-for-one replacement to things that we've learned our whole life that are so systemically ingrained. And if you do find a one-for-one replacement, it's probably just going to be like a shell of the old, like something by a different name. I don't really know what the questions are to be asking instead. But I think if we would be able to let go of that need for something that like perfectly replaces the violent ways in recent history we've done with conflict, it'll open up space for other solutions that are definitely going to be slow and not sexy and messy. But I think that's the way it has to be.
We often think about conflict with people that we don't agree with, but I also think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes that happens with people we do agree with, we think we would agree with, or maybe we have different approaches.
Along the way, when we were building the Center for Civil Human Rights, several activist groups came and said, we don't have a space that tells our story. We deserve a space. And so we want this to be the space. And there were several groups. And I said, you're right. But the question we all have to answer is, are we going to make sure that everything is represented all the time? Or do we believe that the power is that the stories all exist in the same space? And is it that everybody needs 200 square feet? Or is it that we all share this much bigger platform? And at first, the various groups said, no, we want our space, because if we can't see ourselves, then we think that's a problem. I said, okay, but imagine a scenario where something happens in your work and that you want to showcase it in that moment. We had the Martin Luther King Jr. Papers collection, so King's legacy was always going to be present. You could attach a certain issue to that legacy in a new and innovative way. And at first, most people said no. And eventually, a couple of very key folks, including Jeff Graham, who I adore, who still heads an organization here called Georgia Equality, he said, this is powerful. And after the center opened, when marriage equality happened, the rally was there. When the March for Women happened, it started there. When the Black Lives Matter marches were happening, if they didn't start there, they always did what I call the high five. They'd march by there and sort of make sure that they touched it in some way. And I think it proved the point, which was, instead of working really hard to have a little bit of everything, to say it's available for everyone, but let's be responsive to those moments so that people can use it as a backdrop to build something new, was the right call. But it took a lot of time. It took a little bit of an act of faith from communities to say, okay, we're willing to give it a chance. It would have been much more tangible to say, no, we demand a corner, a wall, an exhibit.
I pushed Doug to go a little further on this and talk about what those conversations looked like and how you can come out the other end productively.
Yeah. People said, well, show me how the space is going to work. Show me what this is going to feel like on a daily basis. Working through very specific situations can often be helpful. I would say, well, imagine that a court ruling happens. Mm-hmm. We can't anticipate the court ruling. So what should the center's role be at that moment for you, for your community, for your organization? What does the center need to be able to do? Is it an exhibit that's written 2 years ago that doesn't have anything to do with that, but it does represent the community? Or is it our ability to quickly put on a program and to host a big rally and to do these 3 other things? And we often, if we don't go into the specific sort of scenarios, we get caught up in a very general view of, I need to be in it or I'm not in it, right? It becomes a very sort of dichotomy. It's either this or that. The work really happens on a Tuesday or a Thursday, or, that's when we really made a lot of breakthroughs.
But he also acknowledged that sometimes it's best to split paths.
It's a great story that David Gergen once told. He'd worked for 4 presidents. And he said that the best presidents are the ones who are completely comfortable and clear on their principles. And you didn't walk in every day as an aide to that person and argue their heart. You argued how you were going to get there.
Yeah.
And the worst presidents were the ones that every day everybody walked in and they were trying to win the heart of that person because they weren't so secure in their own vision, right? And it's the same thing. You got to have a group of people. You can't be arguing principles every day. You'll never get any place.
Yeah.
And I've ended up in these situations in all kinds of circumstances, but you end up arguing the fundamental principles. And I've left nonprofit boards because I said, you all have a different vision than I do. And more power to you. That's just not what I think should happen. And so instead of sitting here and fighting about it, I'm going to remove myself so that you can go and see if you can make that vision work. And, part of that is internal work.
I've really been recognizing how much of not feeling disillusioned is in specific kinds of connections to other people. To draw a false dichotomy, I think I've often struggled being drawn to people I find inspiring and it being really messy and not working out. On the other hand, being drawn to people that I find comfortable and feeling idle. And right now I'm in a moment of thinking about, but both of these extremes are not helpful. But finding people that to invest time and energy in that strike this balance of inspiring, but not pushing you out of your comfort zone to the point of it not lasting, of it being a quick fuse. On the other hand, not so comfortable that you're idle. When you can be around people that can strike that balance, it can just be so nourishing. It can be so nourishing. And often I think when people have conflict with other people, or they become frustrated with other people, that moves towards isolation. And that for me has been the biggest disillusionment. I never feel more cynical than when I feel alone. And it can be hard to get along with people. It really can. And it's not always just about working through the conflict. Sometimes it's about different people. Yeah. But definitely centering people in your life who can make you feel comfortable and can push you, I think, is just the answer. Together you'll get back up, dust each other off. And a lot of the time it shouldn't look like getting knocked down, because you're cultivating something that's like a little more sustainable than that. You're not just like throwing yourself in firefights. A lot of your life in practice is just existence, peace, and when it's time to make bigger moves, you're ready.
The second form of abundance is of possibility, which opens up some space for some stories.
Raising a son that I want to be conscious of the world around him and of the issues that the world faces. We often talk about various issues and people experiencing homelessness is one of them. There are one or two people who might come up to you at a red light in Atlanta, what we call a water boy that's trying to sell you water, or someone that may ask for money. Depending on what I have on me, as far as money, I'll either buy water, or I'll give money, or I'll start a conversation, whatever the case is. Often I don't have anything, and Isaiah always has a heart to give. He has a sense of empathy that I just appreciate and admire about him. And to make a long story short, essentially Isaiah and I came up with an idea of maybe not always giving money, but having something to give when we see people in need. And Isaiah and I use a portion of the money that we make from our t-shirt company. Our car always have what we call give backpacks in them. And it's just a small way of acknowledging that something can be done, that we are in a position to give, that he has the power to do something, even if small, that allows him to connect more deeply to himself, that allows money that he makes to have purpose other than using it to accumulate things. It allows him to have a small, meaningful connection with another human. I've watched him excited, rolling down his window, smiles, says hello, and reaches out and hands them this gallon-sized bag that has, in most cases, a bar, a pair of socks, a bottle of water. Isaiah has made fruit snacks a staple, maybe 5 or 6 items that, from his perspective and from his heart, he hopes will make a difference. Will it make a long-term difference? No. But in almost every case, the look on the people's face, it's a very meaningful exchange between the person that's receiving, and they almost always, because Isaiah is young, offer an affirmation or offer a word of wisdom or some advice. Action can be taken that is less about the trajectory of someone's life as it relates to the particular issue, and more that can be a reminder of their humanity. It's a very, very small thing, and that means a lot to me.
I also asked everyone to tell a story of failure, or rather anti-failure. Even when things don't work out, or when we don't know what's going to happen, there can still be a lot of success made, maybe just indirectly.
One of the most formative experiences that I've had in bridging art and social justice was the creation of a film, again, about people experiencing homelessness in Atlanta. It was called 17 Degrees Ain't Nothing. I was able to form a relationship with 5 people that formed a family and a community near downtown. They invited me in, shared their story, and I converted that story into a film that, with their permission, I was able to show. But I had a vision of creating a soundtrack, inviting local artists to contribute songs, and the music would kind of drive the film. These original songs would kind of tell the story of the lives of these humans and their struggles and their hearts and their relationships. But I'd be able to sell the CD wherever the film was shown to give back to the people in the film. And it didn't work out according to plan because of the transient nature of the unhoused and because of the reality of gentrification. By the time we made any money to give, I'd lost contact with the people in the film. The place that they had occupied was boarded up, sold, no trespassing signs were put up. At the point of highest impact, when their story was being told the most, they were kicked out of what they had made into a residence for themselves. And I was hurt by that this couldn't be a sustainable way to support them. Every dime that we made, we gave it to the Open Door community, which is a kind of the Catholic worker home where people live in residence in an intentional community with people experiencing homelessness. And they provide so many wraparound services. But I've not been able to relocate or connect with the people that were actually in the film. But what that film and what that effort allowed was a shift in my commitment and in my deepening understanding of the power of art as a vehicle for social change. Whatever stereotypes that are associated with people experiencing homelessness, this film just offered so much of a nuanced understanding of that. And it allowed me to be able to see for myself more than any other project that making art can be used to raise awareness, change perspectives, create worlds of possibility for people who otherwise don't see themselves in a certain light or see others in a certain light. It gave me a sense of purpose for how to use my ability as an artist. I conceived of an initiative and a project called the Ethics in the Arts program at the Center for Ethics. The ground that it grew out of was 17 Degrees Ain't Nothing. And all the awareness that has been raised about so many other issues, so much change has been affected in the community, in the lives of students, in the lives of artists, and in faculty. That film, that soundtrack, those humans who offered me the grace and were radically present to themselves and had the courage to bear witness to a truth that was theirs, even if no one thought it was true. That opportunity to tell their story and to get to know them created so many more possibilities that there's no way I could have imagined all that came.
So this year I've been working with Georgia Women's Policy Institute. It's put on by the YWCA of Greater Atlanta to help women become better advocates at state level policymaking. Did you know that it is legal to pay people with disabilities in Georgia less than minimum wage? I did not until I started working on this issue, and I care very deeply about disability rights. 14C is the waiver that you can get from the federal government in order to pay people less than minimum wage. So we've been working with all of these different advocates. Unfortunately, that particular issue will probably not be passed this year because it didn't make it over in crossover day. However, I think the thing that was really great about it is that we did make more people aware of this particular issue. And there's an opportunity too, if we can get some language drafted or some people to kind of think about this issue and maybe be interested in it in the state legislature. We're in a 2-year session. So in Georgia, if you drop a bill and it doesn't pass, you have the next year to get it passed before it completely dies. Now we have summer next year to really engage with all the people affected by this particular law and make sure that everyone is supported in the way that they should be, that nobody is made worse off by this changing, because changing people's employment also changes their benefits. Yeah. We have to be really careful about these things, and I think this particular happening has given the time to be reflective and engage even more deeply than we already have with all the different various affected parties.
I caught up with an old friend the other day. She's doing public interest law, fighting against unjust corporate actions, unjust state actions. She reminded me, which I know, but we talked a little bit about, that on a random day several years ago, we had a coffee, and that conversation changed the trajectory of her life. Not because I was super profound, but because that moment she needed a certain perspective, and I just happened to be able to help her see her own perspective. I was just sort of a mirror in that conversation. I had no idea that coffee would have that much meaning. And even when we walked out of it, I had no idea it had that much meaning, right? Mm-hmm. And it reminds me that the most important thing we do may not be the most important thing we think we're going to do on any particular day. And it may not be the most important thing that manifests itself tomorrow. And we can't quite know how those actions are going to reverberate. I have a little stake in her, and I can feel a little bit of hope knowing she's out there doing that kind of work, and there was a little part that I played in it, right? And so I think I keep hope by those moments. I went to give a speech maybe 6 months ago. Guy stands up to introduce me, and he says, Doug, you've never met me. He said, I'm a white guy, my wife's white, my kids are white. We went to the Center for Civil and Human Rights, and it opened up conversations in our family about race that we were never able to have before. That gives me hope, right? I didn't build it for this guy, would have never met this guy. Hopefully there are a few more people like him out in the world. But I keep hope because I think that, one, those things matter, and two, those people can also then lead to systemic engagements. And look, I think all of these big entrenched problems are a whole lot like gardening. Gardening is every day you got weeds, there's a rabbit in your garden, it didn't rain enough last week. You're tending it. Some years it's really great, some years it's not so great. You're trying to make it better all the time. But a garden feeds you. It's got to be there. It's got to work to some extent, or you got a real problem. Both in the way that the labor around it works, but also the fact that all of that work and the fruits of it have to sustain us, even if the garden didn't do as well this year as it could have, or the sweet potatoes didn't come up, so I can't make a sweet potato pie, which is my favorite. That's okay. Doesn't mean I stop gardening. In fact, I kind of have to garden.
I have changed so much over time. And I look at my own growth, the ugliness of my own mistakes, my own naivete, what I thought was right. And I look at where I am now. And though I'm not absolutely where I'm going to be or who I want to be, I realize that for me to be where I am right now took every day that I've been alive, every detour, it took every pause, it took every loss. And because I love the heck out of myself now, more than I ever have, it motivates me to realize that other people are on a journey, that other things are also evolving and changing, and inspires me. And maybe most importantly, maybe most accurately, it allows me to be able to have some patience and a level of grace with other things, people, and institutions. Because if me as an individual took this long to finally stop doing dumb shit, just now, 40 plus years old, just now feeling like I'm able to say things like I accept myself fully for who I am, like a relatively manageable relationship with self-doubt, what could I possibly think is going to be the arc or the journey of things that are comprised of multiple, into like hundreds of me's, with stuff, to be honest, is probably even greater than some of the stuff I struggle with, that now I look back at and was like, bruh, you could have let that go years ago, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been the theme of all of my answers so far, but the simultaneous urgency of everything and the awareness that the energy, the urgency brings out of me, the way that what I see it bring out of people around me is not conducive to actually building a different world. And so you're simultaneously always driven with anger and wanting to act, and recognizing that response in yourself and in your communities is exhausting and not creating anything that feels any different or better. Like, what is the point if you're just fighting and you're feeling life sucks, I really believe that, slow and steady movement always feels the best. And there are moments to act quick, but you're not going to be able to act quick unless you've built a reservoir of energy.
Which leads to the third and final form of abundance, which is of this moment.
As I look at civil rights history, which I've studied a lot, or other kind of movements, the best movements are very good at taking advantage of what seemingly are very small moments, but they were able to see, that moment could actually lead to this much bigger opportunity, or it can unlock this obstacle we've been dealing with, and let's go right there and focus on that. Every day, tons of things that could happen in the world cross my desk. Unsheltered issues, gentrification issues, economic development issues. And you look at them and you say, can that move today where I think it should go? And the answer usually is no. It's not going to move today. By the end of today, it's not going to be where it should. Yeah. And the question that I have asked myself is, what could change that could unlock some of this? Is it a piece of data? Is it somebody else coming on board? Is it some external thing? Answer the question, what do you want?
Yeah.
Well, I want these 6 things. Well, what if we did these 3? I'll take them. Take those 3, and then we'll go for 3 more tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I think that too often we can get caught up, not only in the perfect overwhelming the good, but we can get up in the whole overwhelming the steps.
Yeah.
I think the question of how do we, despite all the crises, how do we make this moment that we're in right now most like the world we want to live in as possible? So not banking on some future success of this movement, or something being stopped, some campaign being won, some system being overturned, some revolution.
What do we want to do, and where do we have resources to pull in? Like, where does the abundance come from, rather than how can we be reactive, whether that's politically or in our communities, like. And I say this as somebody who studies public policy, and a lot of that, it can be very reactive.
Yeah.
What do we want to do to be our best selves, and how do we need to get there? And then figuring out what the through line is, whether that is like incremental steps and compromise, if it's, big change, and how do we make that happen, rather than like reflecting on how we can be defensive towards other people. How can we think with more abundance and think of things in their best case scenario.
How would we move, or what would we do if fear, whatever our perspective of limited resources, wasn't driving?
In anarchism, they call it like prefigurative politics, like not just shooting for the ends don't justify the means. Like, we are building the world as we walk. I think if you spend any time outside of U.S. activism culture, whether it's like in the U.S., just like at your grandparents' house, or like when I visited Morocco, there's so much more enjoyment that we can have of daily life, even as so many things are messed up. Looking to not just ask, but like put energy into making this moment more akin to the world we want to live in, and not shaming people for that, because often that can be seen as pleasure seeking.
I got to know John Lewis, and I got to know Andy Young, and I got to know Evelyn Lowry, and some of these great icons. Immense hopefulness in the face of all evidence to the contrary. It's like, and they said, I choose hope. I just choose to be hopeful. I just choose that I believe it's going to get better, and I'm going to keep working for it. They were still active in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s. Andy Young's 92 years old. He is still active. I want anybody who cares about issues of justice and community to be at this at 60 or 70 or 80.
Older, more experienced activists and healers and so on that I admire most are people who really have a good time. And they're not any less aware of how messed up things are or how urgent things are, but they're able to enjoy and like create spaces for other people to enjoy.
One truth is that I am enough, that I have everything that I need, that I am worthy of joy, that the universe is abundant. It will and has and can offer me everything. I can do and I can be all that I need. It is also true that not everyone has everything that they need, and that there's such lack. As a person whose understanding of self is connected to a larger struggle, a struggle for freedom, a struggle for liberation, I hold and am aware of the narrative of most marginalized groups, that part of the lasting impact of the oppression is an internalized sense of a lack of self-worth, of a lack of value. By proclaiming my value, by living in it, by accepting it, to believe that, to say that, to promote that to other people who in any way have been told that they aren't enough. It's like one of the most fundamental acts of resistance is to push back against those claims. It is part of my mission that I have accepted, of living a life that makes people believe for themselves that they are enough.
Thanks for listening. Thanks to Audrey, Gabe, Doug, and Carlton for the conversation. Thanks to Nat Keefe and Hot Buttered Rum, Chris Hogan, and the Mini Vandals in order for the background music. And especially to Manta Rayburn for sending me the instrumental version of this song for the ending. It's called Stand Tall, the Four of Us, and it's about creating the life you want to live and centering peace and community above all else. More to come.